Hello everybody, welcome back to another video, and basically I'm just in the process of finishing off my crossbow unit for my first Crusade project, and I remembered that I've been asked in quite a few comments, and I've had a few messages asking how I've gone about creating the sort of desert, the rocky desert effect on these bases, and it's not a particularly hard process, so I thought I'd basically just turn the camera on and I would show you what I do as I create another base. So you're going to need a few things. So you are going to need a base. I'm using the bases from Big Red Bat that you may have seen in some of my other projects, but whatever basing system you're using will do fine. So a base. AK Interactive Sandy Desert and Desert Sand. I use both of these in my basing, so if you need something like this or some kind of equivalent. Small assorted gravel, you can get this from model stores, or you can sieve this out of sand if you go down to the beach. Cat litter, preferably not used. I tend to rescue a tub full from the bag when I run out before it's distributed, but just for some larger rocks on the base. Tufts and bushes, or whatever your poison is for basing up. I use Tajima 1 grass tufts, and I also use Tajima 1 bushes for getting the job done. 2 paints from CITADEL to dry paint Tyrant Skull and Praxeti White. Now, believe it or not, this isn't hot salsa. This is just some paint from a DIY store. Just some brown paint that I use basically for all my basing. So just that is something that you can slop on the base. And other than brushes, that's it. So I'll show you where to start. So to begin with, you need to do whatever it is you generally do to prep your base. Now, as this one has magnet holes in it, that involves me actually putting the magnets in there. And to do that, all I do is I add some masking tape to this side here. Then I get on and I add these magnets in. So I'll just get that done, and then we'll get the base prepped. It's here that if you want to add anything to raise the height of the base in any area that you want to do it, by just sort of adding some putty or milliput or something. But basically, once you've got this down, all I do is I get the DIY house paint from a tester pot, and I just mix it all over the base to create a nice foundation to work on. Once that's done, just set it aside to dry, and then wait until it's completely dry before moving on to the next step. Once it's dry, it'll look a little bit something like this, and now it's time to add the basing paste. Now, there's a lot of companies that make products like this. I like AK Interactive diorama pastes. I've used them on quite a few things, and sort of I know where I stand with them, and I think they're a good product. These also cost about £8 from my local shop, and they're the ones that they have, so it's convenient for me to use them. I've got desert sand and sandy desert. So apparently there is a difference there. The desert sand is a much lighter mix, more of a beach sand, and the sandy desert is darker. It's more of a sort of got a bit of a rocky texture to it. So I mixed the two together, not in the pots but on the base, and I create basically different layers, and then what I'm going to do is blend them together. So what I do, I use a lollipop stick and I just spoon this stuff out. I usually start with the darker stuff, and you want to create a covering on here that's a few mil thick. So then we can pop tufts and other things into it as well. So just pop that on and then spread it around. Now, if it does go over the edges, that doesn't matter too much, because you can cut this stuff away when it's dry. Get the other colour now, and I just fill in the gap. Once you've got it all on there, it's now time to blend it together. Okay, for this next step, you could use a brush, but I just use some water, and here's my dirty paint water from when I was doing the base coat. But I tend to use just the foam that you get, the packing foam with miniatures. I tear a piece off, tear a few more bits out of it just to get a bit of an uneven surface, and then I dip that in some water. Don't want too much excess, and I just start dabbing it, so just so it starts to mix together, and you get rid of those big lumps. You blend it together. Now it doesn't matter if you get pools of water on the top, because that will evaporate and that will dry. You're just trying to blend it together. Now, while it's wet, I'm going to add on some rocks, because the paste will also act as an adhesive. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a couple of pieces of this cat litter, which sort of acts as larger rocks, and I think we're going to put some here. Of course, if you've already pre-planned where your miniatures are going to go, and just remember and pop them down accordingly. Now I'm going to use some rocks here. Now these ones I just sort of scatter on there. I'm going to want some near the larger rocks. Now with this part of the base done, I'm going to blend these rocks in, and I'm going to use the basing paste that's on there so that they blend in with it. So I wet the brush and I just sort of push the rocks in to the paste, picking up some of that colour, and the water will sort of give it a washed effect, and then when this dries, that will look like dust, the same sort of sand dust has gathered on them, and it will give it a nice coherent look. For the bits of cat litter, you'll see that this absorbs the colour of what's around it, so you're going to get this sort of nice airy stone that's sort of sticking out. So this is quite a funny way of doing things, because you're basically working while the base is still wet, whereas normally in basing you're waiting for everything to dry before you go on to the next step. But for this one, I do everything while it's still wet. Do for now. Now it's time to add a few tufts. So apparently there's no such thing as too many tufts. Well, generally that's true, but we don't want to overdo it. So all I'm going to do is, while the base is still wet, I'm going to take my chosen tuft and I'm just going to press it in, and then when this dries, the adhesive that's already in the diorama paste will hold it. I'm going to put a few of these in, because I'm not creating a completely arid desert landscape. I want quite a rocky terrain. I spent quite a long time looking at pictures of what the land was like around sort of Jerusalem and in the area of Acre. Pop that one over here. And I think we're going to add a bush just here. Okay, now there's only one final thing to do, and then it can be set aside to dry. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the back of my brush, and I'm going to pop that in the water, and then I'm going to just create little divots like that, and this will be like footprints. So if you use the AK snow effect, you can do something very similar. Just thinking about where your models are going to go. Obviously you don't have to do this. I like doing it because I think it shows that like the unit's been moving through. It's not just a couple of guys. So there we go. That's all the wet work complete. So now I'm going to put this on one side. I'm going to leave it to dry. And once that water that's on there has evaporated, that's when I'm going to come back and do the next stage. So the base may still be a bit wet at that point, but it will be dry enough for us to work with. Right, well, it's been about an hour, and you can see that has dried quite nicely. Everything is in its place, and the rocks, the effects on those, they've dried quite nicely. Now you can see some of the white, some of the colour from the cat litter is still showing there. I find that I quite like that. It just shows the variation in the rock. However, the next step will bring everything together. So I'm going to do some dry brushing, and I'm going to use the GW Paint Tyrant Skull, and yeah, we will basically just give the whole thing a dry brush, including the tufts, because it makes it look a little bit dried out. There we go. So after the dry brush, you can see that we've picked out all those nice textures that are on the basing paste, and it just starts to bring everything together. All the blending that we've done already with the basing pastes, you know, goes some way to doing that, but it's only when you really start dry brushing across everything that it really does start to sort of form one cohesive base. On the tufts, as I said, the dry brush makes just things look a little bit dried out. You can go over the bush. There's no reason not to. I just chose not to on this time because I didn't want to knock any of the bristles off. I'm going to give it another dry brush now, and I'm going to use Praxeti White, and this is going to be a lighter dry brush, and I'm just going to do this across the very tops of the rocks and the tops of the footprints and the textures on in the paste, and that's just to represent those really high areas that have been exposed to the sun just a little bit more. So you really don't want to overdo this, so I'm just going to get on with it. And here's the base basically finished. So this is ready now to have the miniatures fixed to it. So I'm using this base in my crossbow unit. So that's for these chaps here. These are the Cavalejo miniatures, printed by Grey Green Customs. And I've already done a couple of bases of these, and this is just the middle element. And what's quite nice about this base is it's going to have a mounted figure on here as well. So we have this chap here. So as you can see, I don't have any form of integral bases, no pudding bases on there. So what I do, if I've got one of these divots, I can quite happily just place put some super glue in that divot, which I created for the footprints, and I can just pop him in there, and he'll sit quite nicely in there. If that isn't the case, if I've pinned the model, then the pins go very easily through this if you drill a hole. If not, what you can do in the case of the horse, you can just drill a small hole into this and just pop the super glue in it and just pop them in. But we'll get one of them fixed on. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll get the rest of the base done, and then we'll see what it looks like all together with the rest of the other bases. All right, so he's on there. I'm just going to get the other two guys on and the horseman, and then I'll come back. And there we go. There is the finished base with the crossbowmen, and they're being commanded forward by the Norman knight, by the noble, and telling them to go and attack. You see, it's a pretty straightforward process, and I just really like how it looks at the end, and there isn't sort of loads of scatter material that's left hanging around, but that's the effect I wanted. As you can see, as I've said, the divots create a nice point to put the feet in, so you can fill that with some glue and you get a nice contact point. Where the foot may end up with a bit of a gap between that and the base, like I ended up with a crossbowman here, you can put just a bit of the extra basing material in there and then sort of paint the paste over it, and you get a nice effect, like he's just pushing it to one side as he's leaning forward. With the horse, I did what I said, and I basically dug a small hole in there to pop the hoof in, and then the material that I dug out I just redistributed around the hoof so it looks like it's been kicked up. So there is the finished base. This is really a video about the base, not so much the miniatures, but you can see how the effect goes together, and it's going to fit together very nicely. So I'll just add this to the unit overall, and then you can see the whole thing. So there we have it. There's the finished unit, all based and ready to go to war on the battlefield. Now, this basing technique would be good for anything where you need this sort of rocky desert basing. So if maybe you were doing stuff to do with the 8th Army or the Africa Corps, Crusade projects obviously, or anything like that, or fantasy. It's a very, very simple way of doing things, and I really like it because I especially like the way that I can just push the tufts into the paste and it all dries together. The only thing about it is you have to work quite quickly. So it's once you start, you need to get these effects, you'll have to, basically continue working. So if you put it down and go away and come back and it's dried and you haven't blended it together, you can get quite stark lines between the two different pastes. Overall though, I'm really happy, and as I say, a few people had asked me questions about how I do it, so I hope that answers your questions. I'm going to be doing this for all of my Crusade bases, and the great thing about it is because I'm doing it this way, I can prepare these bases ahead of time, so I can do a whole batch of bases in one go, which is what I've normally been doing. It's just in this case I only had 2, so I needed to do 1 more, so I thought I'd take the opportunity and show you guys how I've been doing it. Anyway, I hope you guys found this helpful. Let me know if there's anything that I didn't cover and you'd like me to. Otherwise, I will see you guys all again soon in the next one. I'll leave up a few more photos of the bases and of the unit for you to check out. Otherwise, I hope you all have a good weekend, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care.